state and federal law provide guidelines and requirements in terms of accommodations at the polling place. They are typically, but not only, of the physical kind. So there are specifications in state and federal law about width of doorways, about type of doorknobs, about proximity of restrooms, about functionality and type of elevators. And last but not least, every precinct and polling place in America, not just Minnesota, must have assistive voting technology, meaning a piece of equipment where someone who is a voter with a disability can participate. Equipment that can accommodate people with all manner of disabilities, whether it's impairments of sight or hearing or tactile impairments. That equipment has to accommodate all of those needs and all of those concerns, and we have that and are up to speed in Minnesota on all of those accommodations. But we can always do better. And so one of the things that our office has launched is a disability advisory committee, which meets quarterly. And one of the ongoing projects of that disability advisory group is to do a rolling survey, a physical survey of voting locations in Minnesota. We've used primary election dates, we've used general election dates to go out by the dozens and by the hundreds, and slowly our task and our goal is to assess and really sort of audit every polling place in Minnesota to make sure that each and every one of them is up to code and each and every one of them fully accommodates all voters in Minnesota regardless of disability. So the first thing to know about registration in Minnesota is the basic rules of the road. And in Minnesota, a person who intends to register to vote has to make a showing of two things. First, you are who you say you are, and second, you live where you say you live. Both things, not either or. You are who you say you are, and you live where you say you live. Fortunately, Minnesota has a set of laws in place that is very broad and very forgiving when it comes to what you can use to show those things. It isn't just a government-issued photo ID, it's many things. And so we have in statute a broad array of things that a voter or would-be voter can provide in order to register. Now, the most common and most typical is, of course, a driver's license. But we know that not everyone has a driver's license or state ID card. So there are all manner of different ways that a voter can piece those two things together, up to and including something that I'm very proud of, that Minnesota is still one of the few states to have, which is something called vouching. Vouching is the situation where a person might not have each and every one of the things they need to show that, for example, they live where they say they live. So they can get a neighbor or a friend or someone who lives in their same precinct, which is basically neighborhood, but their same precinct, and that person can sign an oath under penalty of perjury vouching for that neighbor or that acquaintance or that person down the street to say that they actually live where they say they live. And I have some personal, though indirect, experience with this. My parents, at one point, moved in late October of an election year. They downsized from the house that I grew up in and was raised in to a condo in a different city. And so by the time the election came around, they didn't even have a utility bill yet, which they could show someone an election polling place. So my father could not have voted in the 1998 Minnesota election had a neighbor not vouched for him. So it is a process that is handy, it is convenient, it has all the hallmarks of credibility and integrity to it that we'd expect and demand in Minnesota, and it's a way for people who might not, through life circumstance, have each and every document they need to be able, in some legally certifiable way, to make the showing that they are who they say they are and they live where they say they live. Voters with disabilities who want to register to vote have at least a couple options. One is to do it on game day or on election day. We're very fortunate in that regard. Minnesota is one of only 17 states that has same-day voter registration. So if any voter, whether it's a voter with a disability or not, isn't registered, has never been registered, needs to re-register, forgot about the requirement to register, they can do that on election day. The advantage of doing it on election day for someone who's a voter with a disability is there are election day judges there trained to physically and otherwise accommodate someone with disability. So you already have a cast of characters there in the polling place who has been trained on disability issues and how to accommodate in all layers of this process. But there's another way that someone with a disability can register, and that is before election day. And they can either do that by showing up to a city or county office And if that person has any question about where that would be, they can go to our website, which again is mnvotes.org, to find out where to go, or they can actually register online. That is a relatively recent reform that we passed in Minnesota to allow any eligible or would-be voter to register online, and typically it takes 2 or 3 minutes. And again, it's about providing information of the kind that will show that the person is who they say they are and that they live where they say they live. Minnesota law allows somebody to bring a person of their choosing to the voting place. That's backed up by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which also allows someone to bring a person of their choosing. I have performed that function. My late father, struggled with Parkinson's disease, and I accompanied him on a number of occasions to a polling place just to make sure that he could physically vote. Now, what the person isn't allowed to do is whisper in the voter's ears about who to vote for. But in terms of translating the intent of the voter into an actual vote, physically helping the person vote, yes, every voter in Minnesota is entitled by virtue of state and federal law to have a person of their choosing help them in the polling place. So let me talk about the accommodation options sort of broadly legally and then non-legally. Legally, we have the Voting Rights Act, which entitles any voter in America to a person of their choice that can come with them to a polling place to help them vote. Then there are subsequent federal statutes, including the Help America Vote Act, which mandate that every polling place in America, with very, very few exceptions, have assisted voting devices in them that allow people with all manners of disability to vote just like everyone else. But then sort of zooming out and stepping back a little bit, there are those legal protections, but what does a voter do if the voter spots some gap in compliance with those laws? Who do you tell? Who do you go to? Well, we definitely urge people to report that to us, to our office, to the Office of Secretary of State. And though we like to say we don't have guns and badges, which is true, we are not an enforcement agency, we will reach out to others who are enforcement agencies. That can include the Department of Human Rights, that can include the law enforcement in the various counties or cities, because it's typically a local government issue. But we're happy to be the go-between. We're happy to be the sounding board. We are happy in our office to be the place where people call in or report those gaps in compliance. It's important for us to know about it for our own reasons, though we don't have any direct enforcement powers. And we're happy to work with our partners in law enforcement or with the agencies to make sure that jurisdictions that have lapsed understand that they have lapsed, because you can pretty well bet that if one person reports it, there have been other people who've experienced it.